I joined the 1st AIF, my number's 277, in the 5th Battalion, and we trained and went to Gallipoli, and I was badly wounded on Gallipoli, shot through the right lung, and was sent back to Australia medically unfit and discharged medically unfit, and was then joined Kelly and Lewis as a turner and fitter, producing 18-pounder shells, and then I went out to see a chap called Dr. Cole, because his eldest son, Nonny Cole, was next to me when he was killed, and he was a very fine chap. And I thought that Cole may be interested to know what a fine fellow the son was. And there I met the younger son, Adrian Cole, later King Cole. And King Cole had just been appointed I think a sergeant in the 1 Squadron Flying Corps, which was then forming, and then I was appointed a sergeant in charge of armaments in Egypt, and was then sent down to Alexandria.
I was in Gallipoli first, and then in Egypt, and then went to France, and it was while we were in France that they invited the applications from foot sloggers and others in the trenches of Flanders, just an approaching winter, and a great many of us were very anxious to volunteer. Anything was better than the trenches. And I had very limited training. It was at the time of the breakthrough in 1917, and they were very much in need of, and we were equipped with Bristol fighters, and put in a few hours, and then we all flew, the whole squadron flew to France. Well, and on a very early occasion, before I really knew much about flying or much about what it was all about, because I'd done very little flying when I got over there, we were flying along the somewhere near the front line. I didn't know exactly where it was. All I was trying to do was to try and follow the leader. And the patrol, we generally patrolled in fives. And suddenly we were attacked by some German aeroplanes, which I believe was part of Richthofen's circus. I was told afterwards it was. All I knew was that they were Huns.
The Camel, if you get in, now don't attempt to turn till at least 2,000 feet up, you see, and then go very gingerly. And that's the only instruction they could give you on. You were a pilot in a sense. The casualties were terribly heavy in that period of the war, and they were bunging out the people with a total flying time of 6 or 7 hours.
I come down to show the pilot, my pilot, yes, that I had taken with me, to show him the dead Germans in the pits and the shell holes and things after the battle. You'd never count on the 8th of August, the battle on the 8th of August. If you counted for a year, you'd never count the number of dead Germans there were.
And then we would do what we call line patrol, up and down over the lines, roughly as far over as we dare go, and looking for things or people. And then right at the end we would do some low strafing as well. When they really were retreating, we go out and chase down, yes, down on the ground level and shoot up anything we could find. So on my first real offensive patrol, we were in formation. I was right on the inside, being the junior, and as we turned round, I stalled the aircraft, and it got into a spin. And I was immediately being chased by a German. A tracer was going around me, but my flight commander saw what had happened and immediately brought the rest of the formation down and picked me up again. And so that was my, if you like, closest escape.
In those days I didn't have much fear at all. I was, you know, that type of a bloke I'd have a go at anything.
Yes.
But I often think today and shudder at some of the things I used to do in those days.
Jerry Martin. Now, Jerry was a dear little bloke and a wonderful flyer. And Jerry, I was a particular friend of Jerry, and Jerry said, come over to this, he said, Alf, he said, we're going over to France tomorrow. He said, but I won't come back. I said, oh, don't give me that, Jerry. I said, you and Grandy, I said, the two best airmen we've got here. He said, that doesn't mean a thing. He said, I won't come back. I believe, I never saw this, but I believe he got over there, he went into everything, and he got tackled by about 7 Huns, and they shot him to pieces.
And he said in the mess, look, I'm going out, I'm going east till I get Huns. Anybody coming? Well, 7 of us went. Anyhow, we were jumped by 12 Huns over this when we were well over their side. We lost McEwen in flames, we lost Cornish taken prisoner. A message came that the patrol was put off for an hour, and so we waited another hour, and the patrol was put off for another hour, and then somebody came back and said, it's all over, it's finished. And what do you mean it's finished? He said, the armistice has been signed and that's the end of it.
There were rumours of war coming out, you know, and then we heard war was declared. Then Australia, of course, was in it too, because England was in it. I don't know if they'd do that today. And I enlisted. I went to Egypt. From Egypt we went to Gallipoli. I was 16 when I left school and enlisted. I suppose I was 17 on Gallipoli. You don't look for reasons why I did this, you just did it. And I think one thing most young fellows were going, I don't think they realised what the war was, you know, until afterwards. I just went up and went into the recruiting office and, you know, put myself in as a recruit. And they were after men, so I was young and not very big, but I was strong. I said I was 18. We did rifle shooting, and we did marching, and not much training really. It gets you in really decent physical nick, because they'd be running in the morning and doing exercises, but there's nothing over-strenuous, or it's all a bit of an adventure at that age. I'd just left school, you see. At 16, it doesn't seem to matter much. You know, you don't... A little bit older, you'd think more seriously about it, I think. I came through Gallipoli where a lot of more mature people didn't. It wasn't a good place to serve at all. I suppose you weren't frightened, but you were aware of, you know, people were getting bowled over pretty often. In our company, I suppose, while I was there, we had half of them hit. There was a fellow in the boat coming ashore with us was hit, and it rather shocked me in a way. I'd never seen a man killed before. You realise what's going on when you're in amongst it. Yeah. It mightn't be frightening, but it puts you on your toes. It's all a jumble, you know. There was Hill 60, I remember, as we went off, looking back at Hill 60, and there was a pair of legs sticking out from a bush. They were just ditches, down deep, and bits of shelters put over them where you could. and you kept in them as long as you could. You didn't like going out because you're likely to get hit when you're moving from place to place. But in the trench you are fairly safe, you see. The trenches there are not as deep and as unpleasant as the French trenches, because we could go down to the beach, although people got hit sometimes going down. But there was a track from where we were down to the beach. There's nothing to stop us except stray rifle fire. Yes, I suppose you were aware that you could get killed any time, but you're not. You couldn't do anything about it. You were there, and that was all. Bombs thrown over were dangerous, but they never hit me. But they hit plenty of other people. A fellow named Pritchard was shot and killed. It was a bit of a surprise. When you're young, you take those sort of shocks much more easily than you do when you're grown up, I think. I came off in the evacuation day. We left very early in the morning. I had 4 or 5 months in hospital. I weighed about 8 stone, I think. Egypt and the islands, Cairo, they were all exciting places, for a 16-year-old that had never really been out of Tasmania before. It was a fairyland. I suppose we had some sort of an idea that was to protect Australia and in a way England, because we used to think a lot more of England in those days than we do now, because we hadn't seen so much of it, I suppose. After Gallipoli, I thought it'd be nice to get out of it. It's a pleasant enough place in peacetime. You see, this last time I went over it didn't seem the horrible place that it had been when we were fighting there.
Oh, well, he enlisted shortly after the war broke out in 1914. He was designated, I think from the start, they designated him as a driver. Physically, he was not wounded or injured. Again, my mother said that he did show signs later on of the effects that they had, whatever it was, from having been where gas was about. He was on a ship just outside Fremantle on 3 months furlough. But he was outside Fremantle when the armistice was signed. And then I'm not sure when Kentucky came up. From my mother's tape, that when she spoke of it, the government had actually been preparing to do something for the diggers when they came back, and they had in various parts of Australia set aside blocks of land, and the returned soldiers, if they wanted, could apparently take up one of these blocks. The house was provided along with the block, and my mother describes it had apparently it was I've got pictures there, but it's a wooden building. It was lined in pine. There was a living room, 2 bedrooms, a little kitchen, a little bathroom, a little tiny veranda at the front, and a little porch at the back. and one tank, water tank, holding 1,000 gallons of water, all provided by the soldier settlement people. He had been on a farm, and he'd been on a dairy farm, but I don't think he had farming experience. But all the diggers were taken, before they got on their block, they were taken to a place called Wallengrove, which is out of Glen Innes, and there was a government facility there, and the diggers, ex-diggers, were given between 3 and 6 months training there on how to graft plants and how to grow seedlings and all that sort of stuff, and then they were sent to their farm. The climate must have been suitable for apples, pears and cherries, and they went there to plant. They all had apples, pears and cherries all over the settlement, and my mother said that before that they knew at the start that it would be 5 or 6 years before they were getting crops. So in the early years they planted potatoes and turnips and other crops like that, I suppose to try and get some income, and they were partly subsidised by government funds. They had some bad times, and I think my father got a bit upset by that and decided he'd move elsewhere.
Well, the first block was 150 acres, a very small block, near Leeton, and that was he said, the average size for an irrigated farm at that time, obviously absolutely inadequate. But after 7 months he transferred to a second farm at Niambar, which was 251 acres, and built a rather primitive house on that. Then he married my mother, and then they both lived there in very primitive conditions. The Niambar farm, being only 250, wasn't large enough, and so he got additional areas. So the total farm area was 944 acres, but parts of that were flooded by water from the neighbouring farms, because this is an irrigated area, and some areas became swamps. My father said that after wasting a lot of money on that farm, he transferred to a new farm near Griffith, and that's where I grew up. That was when I was just 5 years old, in 1937. Well, I certainly remember dry periods weather-wise, but we didn't suffer from lack of water because in summertime there was always the irrigation, and the rain tended to fall in the winter. I think there's probably 12 inches of rain a year. It was mostly flat country with occasional hills here and there and a bit of granite outcropping. Yes, there were many major issues. Well, snakes, of course, was another problem. Transport was another problem. Getting to schools was difficult. Money was always a problem. But his main complaint was that the farm at Griffith, which was 540 acres of mostly irrigated land, he felt was still not enough to bring up a family. He did write lots and lots of letters to politicians and trying to get more land, and I think at one stage he was granted some land but found it wasn't in a satisfactory position. I thought the Griffith farm might have cost £2,000 because many years later he was shocked to find he hadn't paid it all off and still owed a small amount of money on it. We did almost nothing else at home except jobs. We didn't go to sporting fixtures, we didn't go to church, we went to school. Some of these jobs were very menial. For example, I remember spending time taking a cut lunch down to a stack of wheat bags and sitting on that stack for hours and hours to stop the galahs eating into the wheat bags and causing the stack to collapse. So that would be hours and hours spent, and labour was cheap. It just required a few sandwiches. We had a parents' bedroom, one guest room, and one combined boy and girl bedroom, which was used mostly for cupboards and clothing. If you were sick, seriously ill, you would be taken into one of the bedrooms where there wasn't that much space, but generally most of us slept most of the time on the veranda. None of them finished high school, and I was the only one who finished high school of the lot, and it was mainly because of the difficulties of travel and so on. Well, I think anger in these situations is a number of things. It wasn't all the time, but I think it would be at times when he would find lack of money was restricting his activities or restricting things he could do or do for the family. And so he was frequently angry, but it wasn't all the time. He was a rather nervy man, and he really wasn't very relaxed with horses. The rest of the family were quite happy with horses, but he always tended to be a bit nervous about horses. Well, I think the house was actually a very good house for the sort of thing it was designed for. It was reasonably cheaply built, and I have an idea it was built in 8 days. I certainly have a receipt for £350, which I believe is the total cost of the house. In the early years, it was miserable. We weren't a religious family, and I often used to think, if we're not doing this for the grace of God, why are we doing it?